Does the idea of aliens say more about the human mind than it does about the universe? Like the idea that we want to believe, the idea that we like to believe in something beyond ourselves. We're wired to fear uncertainty, and aliens kind of represent the ultimate unknown. Arguably, God is the same.
It is important for us to know sooner rather than later, because I think it will help us realise the unity of mankind and humankind and earthkind.
I think it asks more question of ourselves as humans and how we, our public consciousness, as opposed to the actual alien question is how do we react? How are you doing, my friend?
I'm good, buddy. How are you? You're looking.
I'm quite excited.
Well, you're looking.
I'm feeling good. Feeling good. I'm quite excited by today's conversation. I think we left our audiences knowing what we might talk about today, which is I thought we'd jump into the subject of UFOs and aliens, and not necessarily whether the big question is whether we are alone or not, but whether it matters, whether we need to know, right? I think I was thinking about this after we last spoke, and I was like, you know what? We often have that binary question of do aliens exist or do they not? And I wondered if it might be a more mindful question to ask whether it really matters either way. So, yeah, I'm quite excited because I know this is a subject you're quite passionate about and you like watching movies and science fiction and you've seen UFOs yourself out in the US and everything like that. I thought let's have a good chat.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all over this. I love this as a topic, and I think the question you ask is a valid question, because maybe it's the question we answer first, even though maybe I thought we should answer it second, is why does it matter if we are or we're not? And also, there are different ways to look at this as well, from a purely statistical point of view, right? What are the chances? And I know that a lot of people will say, well, the chances of there being the conditions right for life are quite unique. And the fact that it's happened on Earth might be quite a unique thing to happen in the universe. However, I think since those arguments were put forward, not only have we discovered, like when I was at school, we'd never discovered an exoplanet. So an exoplanet is another planetary body that is outside of our solar system. So we knew lots of stars were about, but we didn't really have certainty, are there actually planets circulating that? And are there any planets in the so-called Goldilocks zone, which is the habitable zone where things are not too hot, not too cold, just right, hence Goldilocks. And since then, we've discovered thousands of planets that are potentially in these Goldilocks zones. The other thing that's worth understanding is that since the advent of the James Webb Telescope, so back in the 90s, the Hubble Space Telescope was the one that was launched. That was the first big space telescope named after Edwin Hubble, who I think it was in 1920 something that he made the discovery that I believe it was that the universe was expanding, but more rapidly. There was a rapid state of expansion, and that galaxies and everything was moving away from each other, and it was corroborating. I believe it was one of Einstein's theories. So it was named after Edwin Hubble. But then the James Webb Telescope, which came online only a few years ago, and that is miles away from Earth, right? So it's really far away. That is now showing some amazing pictures where I think the analogy one presenter was giving is if you take a grain of sand and you put it on your fingertip and hold your hand or your finger away from your body and you look at the sky, in that space of sky where that grain of sand is are at least 10,000 galaxies. Right? So I think the latest estimation, because I used to use the idea that there were 400 billion stars in the Milky Way and roughly 400 billion galaxies, but now the estimation is closer to 2 trillion.
Trillions of galaxies in the observable universe as well.
Right? Universe, and there's going to be light that will never reach us, and the universe could be infinitely long. So in an infinite universe where the possibility of life appearing is infinitely small, but there is still a possibility, even if it's 0.00 with a million zeros, 1%, then there are infinite life forms. So that, from a sheer scale of numbers perspective, leads me to the idea that life must form elsewhere, especially since, as if you think about life on Earth, it's not one life form, it's millions of different life forms. So that in itself is quite amazing.
Yeah, I think that's the point. Is that for both you and I think we're in agreement that life probably does exist somewhere else, not just in one place. It's probably quite common across multiple places, right? Because you say there are trillions and trillions of potential locations really for life form. But I think bring it back to a mindfulness question. It's like, does the idea of aliens say more about the human mind than it does about the universe. Like the idea that we want to believe, the idea that we like to believe in something beyond ourselves. And if aliens did land tomorrow, here's a question for you, Hari. Do you think it would bring the world together, maybe to fight against a universal enemy, perhaps? Or do you think it would divide us even more? I like the questions that kind of sit around what would happen to us as a species, as humans, if we were to discover them, rather than, and we automatically assume with the movies they'll come and attack us and take us over. But actually, I think there'll be a lot of division just in the way that we look at the world. It's going to have an impact on religion, have an impact on how we see the world as well. So I find some of those questions quite fascinating.
I think it's interesting you say that. There was a speech by Ronald Reagan at one point where he was talking about that very thing, where he was saying, I wonder if all our differences would be melted away if we face some massive alien threat. Now, whether he was talking about alien threat as in foreign, unknown threat, or whether he was talking about alien as in little green men, I think it was the latter, but I don't know. Certainly, a unifying enemy brings people together, the whole Independence Day idea of things. Now, I think a couple of things I would say on that is, one, if we were to perceive some sort of alien threat, I would definitely take that with a pinch of salt, because I would personally believe it to be a false flag. And this will get into some of the evidence stuff we've got later, where the evidence of reverse engineering things and the idea of creating false flags, because governments haven't done this before, right? There were certain false flags to start the Vietnam War, for example, where the Bay of Tonga, where they killed all those servicemen and claimed it was Vietnamese, but actually it was a false flag operation, giving the excuse to go to Vietnam in the first place. So certainly a false flag operation would be something that I would probably perceive of first, more so than aliens coming to invade, on the basis as well that my belief is that there have been aliens coming to this planet for years and years and years. I know that might sound a bit crazy, tin foil kind of wearing ideas, but I'll explain later why that's less so crazy now than it was maybe 10, 20, even 5 years ago. But also, if any civilization that has managed to get to a point of evolution where they are able to traverse the massive amounts of space needed to visit other planets, has probably evolved past this idea of fighting. And they would be so advanced that if they wanted to wipe us out, we wouldn't even see it coming, I don't think. So I don't think that there would be a threat, especially since as with accounts of people who have claimed to have interactions with other beings, they're more benign than anything. So I don't think, I think it would be a good excuse for governments to get us to fight towards a common cause, but I'd be suspicious of it in the first instance, is my answer.
I like the idea you've mentioned, which I haven't really considered, but it makes total sense, right? Is the idea that if they do exist and they've got the technology to get here, they already have the technology to wipe us out. And we've already got the technology to wipe our own race out, right, with nuclear warheads and everything else. So if they can get to this planet, you would suspect they probably have the technology beyond a lightsaber to take out the human race relatively easily. I think going back to the mindful piece, the thing I find interesting, right, obviously, as you know, I've done a lot of research into the psychology of fear. You were the one that gave me the line that a lie is, when you look at the word beliefs, it's a lie surrounded by BS, which I love, and I've used that many times. I'll always credit you with the first person to do that. But beliefs often also fill the gap where either uncertainty exists, and obviously uncertainty is one of the variables in my fear equation, or it fills the gap where certainty is uncomfortable. And I think that's quite interesting in the context of aliens as well, right? So when we're looking at beliefs, those lies, it potentially surrounded by BS, where we can't explain what's beyond space, whether you're religious or not, or whether, the idea, the way that we're brought up with things, everything has to have an end, nothing's circular. So even if you get to what's beyond space, you think, well, what's beyond the next thing? What's beyond the next thing? So where there's that sort of uncertainty, we are very easily able to create beliefs of things that would fill into those gaps. Or even when there is certainty and it's uncomfortable, so we suddenly discover these things do exist and there is alien life forms that we can access or we're going to see or that we verify as being truthful. We still create belief systems around those because often those beliefs are quite uncomfortable as well. And I think that's why it's quite interesting. That's why you get so many, I think, conflicting stories about what people have seen, what people believe, to use that word again, the experiences that have come back, the reports. It's mind-boggling. Obviously, I did some research prior to this show, as I know you have as well. And it's like there's so much conflicting, in inverted commas, evidence. You've got former intelligence officers like David Grusch claiming that the US possesses non-human craft, right? But it's still unverified, but yet so widely discussed. There's whole Reddit groups all about this guy talking about these things.
I mean,
still relatively unverified, and it's like it's what is a truth. It's I find it
one of the things I would say, and I think we'll get to some of those congressional hearings that are paradigm shifting, if you like, because they are at such high levels of government, but also we have to understand that the government has a long history of disinformation campaigns, and with any kernel of truth, they'll try and throw in, if there's one kernel of truth, they'll try and throw in 99 bits of non-truth, which are muddying the waters. And some of these people who are potentially under oath saying what they're saying, they may be wittingly or unwittingly part of any disinformation campaign. But when it comes back to this idea of beliefs and how things might change from a paradigm perspective if we were to really discover that we're not alone in the universe, I think it fundamentally shifts everything about who we think we are. Just like religion would be upended in some ways. Maybe not. I think the church has started to allow some kind of flexibility in how they might approach an alien.
Well, the question would come in, what is or who is God, right? We're wired to fear uncertainty, and aliens kind of represent the ultimate unknown. Arguably, God is the same. You can believe in it fully with every ounce of your soul, but it's still a relatively unknown in the sense that there's no solid evidence to suggest either is there. So the ultimate unknown will always have a lot of fascination and question.
I think actually what might be closer to the truth when it comes to a lot of religious historical ideas, even Greek mythology, is that these may have been alien visitations. They may have been things like that we to explain and interpret as a god or whatever. And going back to something earlier, which you mentioned about, I think you mentioned circular, but I guess the way I would say it would be never ending.
Never ending, yeah.
Where I don't think we'll ever get to the ultimate. Let's say we find an advanced civilization that is 1 million years or 1 billion years more advanced than us, and we're able to communicate with them freely in some way. And then we ask them about the universe, and they'll describe the universe in the knowledge they've got from 1 billion years more advanced than us. However, when we get to the ultimate questions of who created it and what's beyond this, they probably won't know either.
No, that's what I mean with I use the word circular, but we're wired to have answers to questions. And when we think of the idea that something is infinite, for a lot of people, it's beyond comprehension. We can't really comprehend an infinite space because we're wired in everything we do to say there's either a yes and no, there's a finish, there's a start. And not for everyone, but for a lot of people listening, they'll be like, the idea of actually having an infinite space it's beyond certain comprehensions, right? And I think if you go back to the word fear, and I was talking about earlier in beliefs, things like that, like fear isn't always about danger. Sometimes it's about a complete lack of control. So we want an end to something so that we can control something. We can control the way that we think about it. So the idea that we can't control, that this is a never-ending thing, is like, well, it's beyond our comprehension. So that makes it scary, right? It makes it like, I don't want to think about it. It's sometimes easier to believe in a God and an ultimate creator because I don't have to overanalyze what's actually in front of me too much. I can create that. I can use that system that's already there for me. It's already mapped out. A lot of people are following whatever religion it might be. I'm not here to say it's right, wrong, or indifferent because I don't know the answers either. But I do think sometimes it's easier as well than actually looking at the size and scope when you talk about trillions of galaxies and things in front of you. Right? It's mind-boggling.
We can't fathom it, and we have a finite mind and finite brain, and therefore we cannot really understand infinite concepts. But on the flip side, if you think about, I know I'm just looking outside the window, the birds, they don't really have a concept other than what they are currently experiencing, and they remain happy. I think maybe because I don't know if they're asking these questions of themselves or not, but every other creature lives in harmony with its environment, doesn't really seek beyond its environment in the same way. And that's part of the human condition, right? We have this thing called imagination. And we're able to be creative in ways that other species generally can't be. And so we have to create meaning. We have to create a sense of order, of belonging, whereas their order is just the natural world. And they're not thinking about what's happening on a galaxy millions of billions of trillions of light years away. So they're not having this infinite loop dilemma that we tend to have.
Why do you think then that we often use aliens as a projection of our own identities? Like it's either something that's friendly or it's something that's kind of here, it's hostile, it's here to impact us. It's either incredibly advanced or it's incredibly primitive. Like we don't just imagine aliens. I think we project ourselves onto them. It never seems to be something that's like for like. It's always, one or the other, two levels of extreme. Why do you think we do that as
I think we always explain things in a way that we understand things. So, for example, the word education is an interesting word, right? Because it actually means to draw out. And I often tell students, I can't teach you anything new. All I can do, and all education is, drawing out of a person something that's already within them and explaining something unknown in terms of the known. So, for example, if I'm trying to explain the concept of the universe or the solar system, let's say, and gravity, I will explain it maybe with a sheet of material, a bowling ball in the middle to represent the sun, maybe a tennis ball representing the earth, and how the tennis ball might be drawn in towards the sun because of the gravity and spinning around. So I'm trying to explain something unknown using concepts that are known to people. And so when we are understanding things that are unknown, we're using things that were unknown to us, i.e. we're projecting ourselves and our knowledge onto something that's unknown. Now, this is the really hard thing when it comes to trying to explain spiritual experiences to people that haven't had truly spiritual experiences, because we're trying to use words, language, emotion, color. These are things that are known to the human condition to describe something that is completely not that. So it falls down, and this is why people who don't have these experiences can't relate to them, because the words do not describe the experience.
So let me ask you a question. I'm just intrigued here. I'm thinking out loud, so I don't even know if this will make sense. But I'm going back to your bird example, right? So they don't necessarily, they're not questioning in the way that humans do. Our minds work differently. Obviously, the show is called Mindful Pass. You could argue there's a cliche. You said there's always something in a cliche, right? So ignorance is bliss. And we know that peace doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from being okay sometimes with just not knowing. And yet we've got this something within us where we always seek to know more. We do seek to expand our boundaries as humans. And it kind of is in contradiction, really, to that idea that ignorance is bliss. It doesn't. If peace comes from being okay with not knowing, why is the human condition so, I guess, hell-bent on trying to know more? And I'm one of those people, right? I like knowing more, but I'm never really at peace either. I'm always, as you know, like striving. I can't sit on a sunbed or whatever. I have to get more knowledge, and that's how I find my level of peace in inverted commas. Why are we like that?
What I'm hearing, if I'm understanding you correctly, Nick, is that you're asking why are we different from every other creature, basically, on Earth, where we have this need, whereas they don't, I guess, is what I'm hearing. Simple answer is because that's the way it is. And the more complicated answer, and there are, might be that we are not necessarily here by accident, and that maybe someone had or something had a say in our historical evolution to create that desire to know more. Maybe there's something there. I don't know. All I know is that we do have that desire for thirst for knowledge and exploring beyond ourselves, which, some people are happy not knowing that, right? I meet plenty of people on the street who are content with their lives and doing what they're doing and don't ask the bigger questions. Mainly that's because just life is so busy. They don't have the time to reflect on those things. Maybe they haven't taken the time to do that. But there are a significant portion of the population, right, in the thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions, who do ponder those bigger questions of life. But the majority of the 8 billion people don't. So we're very much like the creatures where we are just getting by.
I liked a quote I read in research for this, which is by Arthur Clarke. I don't know if you know this one, if you came across it yourself, but it said 2 possibilities exist. Either we're alone or we're not, and both are equally terrifying.
Yeah.
Which I think is, and it's very apt for this show as well, I think, right? I think it's a really, really powerful quote.
I think the first one, being alone, is more terrifying than not being alone. But I've heard that quote or seen that quote many times over the years and can relate to it, because I think they're both terrifying perspectives. But I think it'd be interesting, to explore. You mentioned David Grusch earlier, and for those of you listening that aren't familiar with any of this stuff, he's a former US Air Force veteran former National Geospatial Intelligence Agency person. And he's claimed that the US has illegal UFO or UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomenon retrieval program. And he was given proof. Now, he's not firsthand, but he is testifying to having interviewed and having had relationships with people who have been in those government, or not even government programs. There's probably a black shadow government that is more responsible for these things, because they've been going on for probably hundreds of thousands of years, but certainly since the 1940s. And it's no coincidence that sightings of UAP, UFOs started to increase after nuclear capabilities came about. And it might be that even detonating nuclear bombs has some kind of signature, billions of miles away. And then people are like coming to keep an eye on us. Now, sometimes I think of aliens like humans, where we're going out into the wild and we're observing, wildlife and gorillas and orangutans and all this. We don't want to disturb them. We just want to observe them. Sometimes we might tag them. Sometimes we might want to follow them about. But if we recognize that someone had left a whole arsenal of AK-47s in the jungle by accident, and these chimpanzees started shooting them, we'd probably be pretty quick to go in there and, if not take the AKs off them, at least take the bullets away. And so they would then suddenly go, oh, hang on a second, these things don't work anymore. But why are we seeing all these strange people around these objects, right? And that's probably why. So I think there's something similar to that, because there have been a lot of sightings over the years around nuclear facilities. So there have been cases where a big famous one was the Maelstrom Air Force Base in Montana in 1967, where the installations just went offline. I think there was another incident where some people reported where they were testing some sort of missile, and an object came and shot a beam of light at it from the side, from the above, below, and it just drops out of the sky. And there have been so many incidents and sightings around like nuclear facilities that it might well be the case that they are trying to prevent us from killing ourselves. So that was in Montana, I think. What else do we have? There's a very famous case, Britain's Roswell. So most people have heard of Roswell, which is the 1947 crash, which was then later claimed to be a weather balloon, even though all the evidence about that was really, really dodgy. But we have one, I don't know if you've heard of Rendlesham Forest.
I haven't.
No, so that was in December 1980, Rendlesham Forest in the UK, but nestled between twin military bases, RAF Woodbridge and RAF Bentwaters. And it says, roughly at 3 a.m. on the 26th December, a patrol witnessed unusual lights and went out to investigate. What those airmen reportedly found was a strange metallic triangular object covered in a pulsing lights hovering somewhere off the ground. Nearby animals began to act strangely, and when Lieutenant Colonel Charles Hall returned to the site the following day, he found unusual marks in the dirt below where the craft had been floating. Hall also describes witnessing 3 star-like objects that hung in the air for hours, with one beaming down streams of light. Holt himself had previously seen combat in Vietnam, Japan, and Korea. Still adamantly believes the Rendlesham Forest was the site of alien visitation. The high rank and combat experience of Holt lends credibility to his report. This was a man well trained in identifying aerial phenomena. And there was also, this happened to a base believed to be storing US nuclear weapons on British soil. So there's a connection between all these sightings and nuclear facilities.
I can tell you something I've seen. This is absolutely true, by the way, and I'm sure it can be explained more easily than the unidentified flying objects. However, obviously I grew up in Salisbury, grew up just down the road from Boscombe Down, which is an experimental army base, right? So where they do all the experimental aircraft, spy planes, all that kind of stuff. And there are various nuclear bunkers and hidden bunkers and things like that around the area, which all confidential, and it's all Salisbury Plain where the army and the MOD and stuff are based. But we had a spat of, and I kid you not, because my dad was a farmer. I remember being in his Daihatsu when he was still alive and going around the farm and the hay fields and all that kind of stuff. Leaving the farm on the evening, and by the following day waking up to the most amazing crop circle that you've ever seen in your life. Like these things, this was imprinted over like many, many, many acres, and it was absolutely massive. It made all the major press. I think it made the BBC News, all those it was huge. right on my doorstep. And I don't know, maybe someone was in there with a machine doing it at night, but there were no eyewitness reports of anyone doing any activity in the evening. It was very, very artistic in the sense that, you know, you needed to have some kind of diagram and plan to follow this thing. It was over like 20, 30 acres of this huge thing. So I've seen things like that, which have always, as a kid, blown my mind. And I remember that was obviously many years ago. It'd been 30 odd years ago. I see if I can find the images from Salisbury of when they were done, because it happened over a summer, and it ended up being almost a tourist attraction, seeing this crop design that happened in the hayfields. And I've just emailed you as well, or WhatsApped you a message, Harry, of the lights that I saw when I was in France. Like I talked about it on the last episode. I think I forgot to send it to you, of a string of lights, which I think is probably the Tesla satellite, maybe, but I've not seen anything like that either. So there's loads of unidentified things out there. I know that you were talking about the UA, or how do you spell it? UEPs, is it? The
unidentified anomalous phenomena.
I saw in my research that the report that was released in 2023 by the NASA UAP report concluded there was no evidence of extraterrestrial origin, allegedly. Obviously, they'll give you what they want you to hear. So again, that's a little bit unknown. But I'd never heard or made the connection between the nuclear bases and the sightings. And it's only now when you mentioned it, and I was thinking of Boscombe Down, experimental air base, nuclear bunkers and everything else. I go, oh, maybe that's why the crop circles were on my doorstep. I mean, who knows, right? It's,
some of the crop, I mean, many of the crop circles are by enthusiasts doing things, but I think when they first started out, they were a little bit more unknown, and they still may have some impact, because there's certainly there's a documentary I'm definitely keen on watching soon that's just been released on Amazon called S4, the Bob Lazar story. So I think you've heard of Bob Lazar, but for those of you listening that haven't, he worked only for a small amount of time, I believe, in the 1980s at an area called S4, which is near Area 51 in the US. And he described in a series of interviews with the investigative journalist George Knapp about reverse engineering these flying saucers and anti-gravity propulsion systems. And he said that they relied, this is in 1989, by the way, that they relied on a propulsion compound called element 115. And so what's interesting with that is that he's talking about this thing called element 115, which doesn't exist on Earth, back in 1989. And it was impossible for us to synthesize that heavier element here on Earth. But then years later, I think in 2000, maybe early 2000s, but I think it was added to the periodic table in 2013, Russian scientists added element 115 because they were able to synthesize it very microscopically and very quickly in a lab. And he's talking about it 20 years before these things actually become discovered. And what's quite compelling about his story is that he's made no money from this, right? He's actually been hounded, and his story stayed consistent for 40 years across hundreds of interviews. So he's either the greatest, most disciplined hoax in the world, or he is telling the truth, at least as he believes it. Now, a lot of the time in these cases, people they would work in silos, and they weren't told exactly where these things maybe came from. They don't know where these things came from. Maybe they're not extraterrestrial. Maybe they're coming from the oceans. Maybe it could be that aliens have existed, quote unquote aliens, but have existed on this Earth even predating us.
If you go into Reddit, there are lots of things on Reddit around these substations in the ocean, and they're leagues and leagues under the sea. They've been there since before human time. I don't know. And they always seem to be verified by some random US sort of naval experts who's general or something, which, you know.
I mean, the thing is, we've got to start paying attention to the fact that people like you talk about David Grusch, but there's also David Fravor. He's the retired Navy pilot that had the famous 2004 Tic-Tac encounter. So that was released by the Pentagon. I think it was either 2017 or it was during COVID, where a bunch of these videos were released by the Pentagon as authentic videos taken from naval ships. And he saw the Tic-Tac UFO. Now, I've had other so-called experts on the UFO phenomenon talk about that actually the Tic-Tac UFO was not aliens or anything like that, but it's actually reverse engineered technology by Lockheed Skunk Works. So they're a company that is heavily tied in whenever you're having conversations about UFOs as being people that maybe have the inside track on these things and have these technologies and actually are reverse engineering them and And what you saw there on the Tic-Tac UFO was Lockheed Skunk Works project that was able to move at lightning speed, go from tens of thousands of feet up in the air to a couple of feet above the ocean in milliseconds. Then you've got Ryan Graves, former Navy test pilot, testifying UAP sightings by military pilots are frequent, but not so reported. Retired.
So this leads to a Reddit post that I read, which, again, I try not to subject myself to Reddit too often because it's an echo chamber for you watch one video and everything's evidenced by the next video and you think, oh my God, I'm going to lose myself here. However, in relation to this show, I did dive into the archives of Reddit to see what was out there. But there's a lot of theory where they are releasing this information strategically so that we slowly get the world to understand that there is evidence out there. It does exist, but to give us all of it in one go would be too much. It's a bit like we know the technology above and beyond AI is way more groundbreaking what we're able to have access to because the nation and we're just not ready for it.
Yeah.
So it's almost like there's a lot of conversation out there saying it's slowly being drip fed,
for decades, and it makes sense, right? When I go in and I teach students how to speak in public, I don't go in at 9 o'clock in the morning and say, right, give a 1 minute speech in front of 30 people. We do that at 3 p.m. We don't do that at 9 a.m. And we teach them a lot of the time without them realizing what they're being taught and what they're really understanding until the end. And then they realize, and that might be the
here's the question I wanted to ask you, just to get your view on it, really. Because you mentioned about, earlier, maybe they present themselves more when there's nuclear things at play. Maybe they're worried about us actually killing ourselves on the planet and they want to protect us, or they're watching us, observing us like we observe chimps in the wild, as you say, like tagging us. And they don't want us to wipe ourselves out. They're still studying us and understanding us potentially, right? So they appear when maybe there's a risk that we're going to start utilizing these nuclear warheads against each other. The question then is, are we ready to meet something more advanced than us? If that's the case, let's be honest, we're still kind of learning to understand how to live with ourselves at the moment. There's a bigger question, but it's like, is actually the search for aliens the ultimate search for meaning? Are we ready for it? Is the government right to be delaying us, using your public speaking reference just a moment ago? Do we need to find more peace on Earth before the governments around the world do disclose, if they have it at their fingertips, more information?
Okay, I think in terms of ready, it's like having those chimpanzees out in the wild. Some are playing with fireworks and you're trying to get them to stop playing with fireworks. Some of those chimpanzees are going to be ready for that human interaction, some are not, like anything. And will it create more understanding and meaning? No, because it's the same as when the explorers were leaving Europe and discovering the new worlds and things like that. By just understanding that was more to the world than we thought, it just leads to more questions and more desire to know more. So I don't think it's going to lead to any of that. In terms of the governments waiting for humans to be ready, it's not necessarily their call. I understand why, if they are hiding things, it might be because there are technologies that come along with that knowledge that will be very disastrous for some people. But I think
it could be their call if they have the technology.
I think they've got the technologies if they do exist. So I think it's impossible that they don't. Let's assume, for example, the alien hypothesis of them being on Earth is real. I think it's impossible that some governments don't have access, whether it's governments or shadow governments within the government. They don't have access. But I think,
well, if there was a crashed aircraft, the old Area 51, whatever it is, and they've captured an alien species, maybe it's dead, maybe it walks like us, 2 feet, whatever, the little green alien. If that was in existence and it was under lock and key, and suddenly they decided to say, actually, we're going to make this available, do you think they have a duty to tell us now that they have that within to share with us? They've been hiding it from us. Do you think there is a duty that they should be sharing that knowledge with us now if they actually have another life, well, not life form, maybe it's dead, whatever, but they have access to it to prove it to us and it's real? Do you think they should be sharing that? And what do you think would be the ramifications of doing so?
Yeah, I think they should be sharing that information. Maybe they don't need to share everything in terms of technology, because let's say there are some crazy technologies out there, I don't know, right?
Sure, probably are.
That probably are, right? Maybe there's time manipulation technology, because any species that can travel millions of light years has probably manipulated gravity, and if you're manipulating gravity, you're manipulating time, and so there's all sorts of things that implies. But so there may be some national security reasons why certain things aren't disclosed. However, the idea that humans are not the only, or the life on Earth is not the only life in the universe, I think is something that is important for us to know sooner rather than later, because I think it will help us realize the unity of mankind and humankind and earthkind, so that we can then get past those issues of borders and segregation and seeing each other as different. Because you were talking about having a common enemy, maybe. Like, if we understand that actually there is a life form that is so wildly different from us, then how similar are different races going to seem to us, right? Because we're all humankind, right? So we're not going to have this, hopefully, we're not going to have this race war, we're not going to have all this stuff, because we'll see actually now there's something that's so different that we're actually pretty similar.
It's more that unites us than differentiates us, which
yes.
is a nice way of looking at it.
Yes, and one of my favourite lines from the Black Panther movie, there is more that unites us than divides us, right?
Which is good.
And so I think they have a duty to let us know this information. And it's getting to the point, and I think the internet has accelerated this beyond all recognition, because information, as well as disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, whatever kind of information you want to talk about, has propagated so much that we are more aware of things, right? I wasn't aware of the biggest UFO incident until probably about a couple of years ago, which was one in Brazil, which was Brazil's Roswell, for example, called the Varginha incident. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one.
I wasn't until I did my research for this.
Okay.
No, I wasn't aware of it until literally about 24 hours ago.
A subject of a documentary by a filmmaker called James Fox. I think his documentary was called Moment of Contact, if people want to look at that. That was in Brazil, where it was, I think, January 20, 1996, and several residents of Varginha in Brazil saw something fall out of the sky. Everyone agreed it was this cigar-shaped object traveling at high speed when it suddenly faltered and abruptly changed before heading to the ground. And then military people got involved. People saw people being, even alien bodies supposedly being taken. Someone died on account of it because of exposure. The official line, of course, was that these people saw this homeless guy, this 4-foot homeless guy running around the town and not an alien. So who knows for sure? But there was certainly enough information, and these eyewitnesses haven't really changed their story in 2 or 3 decades. And the other thing is that people often say is that what would happen? Why would a civilization come millions of miles to Earth and then crash? And that is a good question.
I agree. It's a good question.
It is a good question. However, here's my answer to that question. How many probes have we sent to places like Mars and Moon and places like that which have crashed? Now, we've got the technology to send them there, but we're not necessarily the technology to have them land. And who knows what happens to that? Yeah, maybe they're traversing the skies when a nuclear explosion happens or some other reason. I don't know. And maybe for every one that quote unquote crashes, there are 1,000 more that haven't, and we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, they, as you say, they could have, just because satellite and things like that, the radar can pick up our own machines, doesn't mean it picks up theirs. They could be right in the middle of some kind of nuclear testing thing, right? And they could have been caught in it and not been picked up by our level of technology. I think the human brain, though, is wired to fill in the gaps, right? So especially when there's uncertainty, we don't have answers. And I think that's why I find sort of a lot of this so fascinating, because it's not always about what's real, it's about what might be. And that just always asks questions. So I guess for you, because you've got a different mindset maybe to a lot of people that listen to the show, you're generally fascinated by the idea of alien life form and UFOs. So let me ask you a question. Let's say after this podcast, Harry, you sit down for your smoothie and your dinner, whatever, and something lands or falls from the sky. What would be your first feeling? Would it be fear or curiosity? Do you think? I know you can't predict it. What do you think it would be? Curiosity or fear?
I mean, I think it would definitely be curiosity, because my fundamental belief is that they're not here to, I mean, this is a wild belief that they're not here to do us harm.
Yeah, I like that though. I find that quite reassuring to know your curiosity be your overriding emotion over fear.
The other thing is that if there are alien species, because I said we live in an infinite universe, it's more than likely that more than one has visited or is visiting, and maybe we are in the midst of some galactic war we have no idea about, and some of it's taking place on this planet, and so maybe there are more hostile aliens. I think on balance, it's like it's like anything, right? You go out into the world, you go traveling, you're going to meet hundreds of people, you're going to meet strangers and people, and 99.9% of them are going to be great, and you're always going to get the idiot, the criminal, or whatever. And the chance of you interacting with them are small. So I think it would be the same case here, where if they do land in my garden after this podcast, I would be very curious. I'd be that Richard Dreyfuss character maybe in...
Did you ever see the Noel Edmonds thing where he did the aliens in the back garden and it waved? And you got to look at this. I mean, this is a good example of where technology evolves. It was the beginning of television programs. The alien, if you look back now, it's so bad. You cannot believe that someone believed it was real. But that's because we're looking at it now in a world of AI, in a world of CGI and all these things. It is hilarious. I recommend anyone to go and look at Noel Edmonds' alien prank on YouTube. This flying saucer lands in the back garden, is a big dig out the back garden, an alien comes out and waves to the woman who comes out, and she believes the whole thing because of the level of production. What I like about this story, and just linking it to what you were talking about earlier, and what we were talking about, is the idea of whether they're kind of spoon feeding us information until we're ready to understand that it's real. If you had spoken to people in the 60s about what AI can do now, like, they wouldn't have been ready for that then. Like, we had to slowly evolve to what's coming. And I wonder if we're just getting to a level of when we have enough comprehension about what, how advanced technology can be, maybe we'll start to see and understand a little bit more of what may already have been discovered or maybe out there, because we're at a point in time, maybe within our lifetimes, Harry, where we will be at a point where we can comprehend it and understand it and not actually flee from it or try and make it something else. Because I don't know, who knows? Maybe it's many times more advanced than it is now. But
is what we're talking about now in terms of aliens and everything might not be that at all. Because often you were talking about us looking at life through the lens that we are shaping our realities with, and historically, if you look at ancient texts, when they talk about certain things, they're talking about it from a spiritual, religious point of view, because that's what they were believing at the time. Yeah. We're seeing things, and we're seeing them as maybe alien technologies. Maybe they're not at all. Maybe they're interdimensional. Maybe they are spiritual. Maybe there's a combination. Maybe all things are true. Maybe there are three-dimensional, physical, humanoid type creatures existing on this three-dimensional universe, but then there are interdimensional beings that traverse this universe, and maybe there are ones beyond that, and maybe all those things exist simultaneously. And so we are looking at things through the lens of UFOs because that's become the popular thing over the last 20 years. Whereas if we were having this conversation 2,000 years ago, we'd be talking about it in terms of gods and things like that, probably. But I also want to sort of say, like, I have this discussion with my mum all the time. She listens to this podcast now and then, and I think she's slowly coming round to thinking I'm not batshit crazy when it comes to this alien stuff. She's someone who's definitely happy not really knowing much in that regard and just living life. But I look at these things now. I cannot categorically say, hand on heart, and bet all my money and health in the world that aliens are real and they're here, right? Because I, to my knowledge, have never interacted with one or witnessed one or anything like that. And when we talk about, you say that I've seen UFOs, just to clarify, right, to everyone, a UFO is an unidentified flying object, right? That just means it's something that's in the air that's not identified by the person or anyone else. And the things I saw in Arizona, although I was on a UFO trip, were interesting, and some of them were triangular shaped, like three lights and things like that. But are they alien? Are they experimental craft? Were they trick of the light? Were they stars? I mean, who knows? So I'm not saying I've seen aliens or anything like that. But there are really interesting cases where there have been mass observations with similar stories happening all the time. Like the Phoenix Lights, you've probably come across that one as well in your research, maybe. Have you come across that? 1997, yeah. Like a V-shape hovering for several hours in formation. And I think they said the official story was some sort of testing of different aircraft or whatever. But the fact that they people saw that, we're talking 10 to 20,000 witnesses saw the same thing, including like the governor who then later went on stage and laughed it all off and put a bit of a hoax, but then years later came clean and say he didn't acknowledge his own encounter because he didn't want people to panic, right? And he also was facing some weird fraud charges he didn't want to draw attention.
Welcome to the human condition.
Ultimately came clean with the idea that actually, yeah, he'd seen these sorts of things as well, and that the craft.
I'm still laughing at that example because it just shows what humans are like, really. Like,
Well,
self-preservation is still
yeah,
bigger
yeah.
than what you've experienced. I'm up against these Ford things. I'm going to look after number one before I look after anybody else.
And also,
it's worrying, really.
10,000 people, 20,000 people seeing it, you could argue, is it mass hysteria, mass delusion? Because I believe that is a thing as well, because I think we're so connected. Our brain waves are interconnected. We've talked about heart math and brain waves before, that maybe such a heightened event could create everybody to see and think of the same thing. But
I think it'd be amazing to have 10,000 people in a space and a craft appears in the sky, right? So that happens. Imagine it for a moment. Movie moment, the Independence Day, huge craft in the sky. Every news channel goes live, social media explodes. And watching of that 10,000 people or 20,000 is unbelievable. How many freeze? And because they're just curious. So I'll use curiosity instead of freeze, but you know where I'm going with this. How many flee? They just leg it, they go, and how many immediately want to fight? Like that fear response to such a phenomenon in the sky. How many would actually look at it with genuine compassion, curiosity, interest? How many would just get in their cars and just get out of there, preservation being first? How many would immediately take up arms and try and shoot something down without having any knowledge as to whether it's there to harm you or not?
More important than that is, you've got those 10,000 witnesses, but now, would anyone believe it, right? You could be going live on social media right now and saying, actually, that's AI generated. And it wouldn't be hard to cover it up because the news channel...
No, you're right. You're right. There'd certainly be the doubters. You'd always have the doubters.
I mean, this Phoenix Light one just shows, this is a sitting governor who personally witnessed it and ran a deliberate cover-up and admitted to it later, right? So things like this happen all the time.
What do you think would be the reaction? 10,000 people. How many do you think flee? How many fight? How many? Do you think it's an even split?
I actually don't think anyone. Well, if I'm looking at what actually happened, maybe with the Phoenix Light, I'm not sure that many people ran. I think it was more standing and wonder, because mostly in that case they don't know what it is. Now, if a craft flew down onto Trafalgar Square in broad daylight and hovered there for 15, 20 minutes. I think you would get, it depends, right? If it comes down and not much is happening, maybe not that many flee. But if lights start whirling and things start going round and noises start coming out of it, I think you'll get more people fleeing. Yeah. But I don't actually know, because like I said, like this, for example, this aerial case in Zimbabwe, which is one of the most credible mass encounters with aliens. So this is back in 1994, 10 a.m. Zimbabwe, some rural school, and 62 people aged between 6 and 12 say they saw one or more silver craft descend from the sky, and the creatures came out, right, were allegedly human-like but had waxy skin and penetrating eyes, but none of them spoke. But as is always the case with these encounters, they telepathically spoke to them, and they were talking to them about Earth's environment and everything else. So I think they have some, like, aliens, at least in some of these encounters, must have some level of control over putting thoughts into our heads, or maybe even making us freeze. I think they've got some level of control about making our technology not work. So even if you try to get your smartphone out and record it, you might not even be able to see it. So I think maybe the majority might well freeze, because if there is that interaction, I think it would be a freeze case. I think that would probably be the overwhelming response to most people.
I do find it interesting. I think uncertainty is just part of what it makes to be human. It's almost a riddle. I don't think I want it answered, even though there's an element of me that wants to know. I find it I think uncertainty is, you almost need it. You don't want
to know the UFO.
I don't know. I don't know, Harry. I don't know if I want to know or not. I think an element of not knowing, it can be healthy to have that distraction, to have something bigger than ourselves to wonder about. I don't know.
If we were having this conversation 800 years ago, 400 years ago, I guess 500 years ago, and we're thinking about the new world, we're thinking about what's beyond the ocean, even though I guess people have sailed over there before Columbus, but I'm sure you'd be someone that would want to know what's beyond the shores of Southampton, right? And go. And that's not destroying your worldview of what it's like to be an English person or a person living in England, knowing that America exists, right?
But equally, that you've picked an example, and it's a fair one. It's a good one. It's like, where's the world flat? Is it not? Let's keep exploring. But equally, you could look at the lives before smartphones. right? Would you want to know that that's the way the world was going to go, and everyone was now looking at? If you knew that you could be given a view into the future to know that's what's going to happen, you can't stop it. Or would you rather go back to where peace is being, bliss? Ignorance is bliss. And sometimes those that most at peace are the ones that aren't always seeking to find the answers. They're happy with what's in front of them. I don't know. I think sometimes you've got to pick your example.
Are you talking about then with the smartphone example? You're talking about us knowing, say, 1960s where telephones were headed, and that's about knowing the future. Are you saying that by understanding or interacting with aliens, we are therefore seeing our own potential future? Or
no, well, maybe. I do think it's a lot of the way we view aliens is reflections on how we see the world. I think that's not really the question I'm asking, although I take your point and I could answer that separately. I just think there's an element of it's good to have a bit of unknown in there. Whether it's God, doesn't have to be aliens. I'm just talking about whenever things that are so much beyond ourselves and our own technologies, our own worlds that we live in, sometimes having all the answers isn't always the best thing.
I mean, I think to put your mind at ease, if you were tomorrow to wake up to headlines that aliens are real, they've been on this planet for years and years, that is going to lead you to have more unknown. So you're going to actually have more unknown by knowing that. So you'll be fine because you want the unknown.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I guess it depends on how it's released and how it's discovered, right?
It's the Socrates quote, right? The more I know, the more I realise I don't know. And as you start to understand, oh wow, there's alien civilizations and they've been here, there will be more unknown than there will be known. So you will be fine if you're someone that cherishes the unknown in your life. You will have more unknown by knowing this than by not.
We're getting into a tongue twister here. We can imagine if they were speaking to us telekinetically and or telepathically rather, and suddenly you realise that they've been in control of us for years, and the conversations you've had with those that you've lost, was it really a conversation with those people, or was it being controlled? All those. I just you can go. It's a Pandora's box of questions to come forward.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, and then we'll start asking. Do they see death in the same way? Is there life beyond death? There's so much. I mean, when you dig into this as well, I'm a big fan of. I think I've shared it with you. The channel, the Y-Files, where he goes does all these things and debunks it. But one of the stories was, I can't remember who it was, Ezekiel or someone like that, who had an encounter with God and he was taken to heaven and shown around. And it sounds remarkably like him being taken up to a spaceship and seeing the earth from above and all of this. And it might well be, that all of our myths, history, religious are deep rooted in these.
Yeah, I mean, look, I guess you used the word, so I've got something in my eye. Oh, apologies, I'm scratching my eye here because something's just flown into it and it's hurting me. You mentioned the word reverse engineering in terms of technology earlier with aliens and craft, things like that. I wonder if maybe then if we were to discover, the question would be like, are we ready to meet something more advanced than us when we're still learning to understand ourselves? However, to reverse engineer it, maybe if we were to discover something else that already had that tagging and that observation of us over many, many years, generations, that whatever, maybe they can help us understand ourselves even better than we can. Who knows? I get that.
Again, to explain it in a way that people understand, I believe the human race is currently, from an evolutionary point of view, an infant, right? A 2 or 3 year old. Now, if we took every 2 or 3 year old on the planet and put them on an island, and they have to grow themselves into adulthood and all that, it's going to be messy. It's going to be like lots of people are going to die, all sorts of things. The fact that we as adults are there to help them and show them and teach them how to cut and use a knife and teach them how to cross the road and do all these things is not taken away from their experience of evolving. And so it's the same thing here, right? We are currently infants being hopefully guided by more mature adults. So I don't think it takes away any of our experience. I think it's actually needed for us to evolve beyond 2 years old to get.
Let me ask a different question directly for you in the way you live your life. How would you feel? And it's all hypotheticals. I just find these questions interesting, right? So it's my coaching background. I like asking lots of questions. So we suddenly discover there's an alien life form and they've been observing us and potentially telepathically be controlling us in one way or another, conversations, actions, inventions, innovations, whatever. How would that make you feel if you knew that part of your own journey had been outside of your control, but you thought it was your control decisions? You live your life differently to 99% of people on the planet anyway, Harry, in the way that you're quite disciplined, the way you live your life anyway. If you suddenly realize that not all of those decisions were your own, I'm just saying hypothetically, how would that make you feel?
Look, firstly, living life outside of our control. Most of life is outside of our control, right? I say to people all the time, you can only control two things, right? Your own attitude, your own actions. Now, if what you're saying is, am I not even in control of those things either? Again, it comes back to this religious question about free will, about destiny, about preordained things. And I often think about destiny and free will and preordained things like like you're like this, because it's like a football match, right? In that maybe the universe is set up as a football game, and that there are certain rules, right? You have to, and some of those rules change over time, right? Because I think we've introduced like the no pass back and things like that. But ultimately, those players have the freedom to move left or right, depending on what they need to do to get the goal. But there are still certain laws and rules that must be obeyed in order for that to be played out. That doesn't mean that there's no such thing as, I don't think it's a zero-sum game, or that there's one thing or the other. I think there can be an element of, and maybe there's no such thing as free will, and that we are all walking a certain set path. But I think that the other path that could be walked is also being walked in that case. I think if we're
have you been watching Pluribus on Apple TV?
You know what? I started watching it with my mum. We got about 2 or 3 episodes in. I felt like it was going nowhere, and it would be one of these ones that you watch it for 4 seasons and then.
That's a little bit like that. Everyone's on the same. Everyone's part of what some.
Well, I like the idea. I understood the idea of it, and I understood what that creator was trying to do with that show, and I somewhat agree with it. Where it's kind of like the Borg in Star Trek, where there's the hive mind, and that we realize that we're all actually connected. And when and spiritual leaders talk about this all the time, like when you hurt another person, really you're hurting yourself. When you really realize that you're all connected. It's like sometimes when I give the analogy of throwing trash, when we used to have this thing called Keep Britain Tidy in the 80s, because there was lots of rubbish everywhere in the 80s on the floor. And people didn't really think twice about it. But if you went in to your own home and threw all your rubbish on the floor and just left it there to fester, you wouldn't do that. It's just because we consider our home as being our 4 walls of our house. But if we consider our home as being our planet, we're not going to then trash our home. And so I think people need to think on a bigger, grander, more connected scale. So I understand the pluribus thing is that, they're all working to the common good effectively. So there's no need for any of these, money or things like that. And I like that idea. And I think we all stem from the same place. And I think I've talked about it briefly in my Boothoo experience, but ultimately everything is connected, and we're all just little branches of the same tree. We just think we're different trees, but we're not. And I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding of the human condition, is to really identify us as separate when we are unified. And we know this through COVID, because we were all connected through the breath, and the breath was what was making us ill or not, right? And yet, like, the breath is something that we need, right? It's the spirit within us. Literally, it means spirit means breath. And so I understand that we're connected, but yet I feel mystified that the planet did not understand this concept during COVID, just how interconnected we are. I think it did on a superficial level, but not on a spiritual level. And I think what astronauts realize, and the Artemis crew who have just come back to Earth last week, what every astronaut talks about, and they more than most alive because they saw the Earth from a great distance, are just seeing a connected ecosystem. They're not seeing separate religions, ideologies, fashion, whatever. So I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but yeah.
No, well, I tell you what, it sparked something else, which is slightly off piece, but it might be a nice way to, nothing to do with aliens, but it's a nice little parenting tool for the parents that are listening to this. And I think I may have mentioned this, I like my parables, but it reminded me of the gift of insults, which I've talked about before, I think, on the show, maybe an early episode, where there's a young great warrior that's to win all of its battles against the Zen masters of the past by hurling loads of insults at them, until eventually they would score off a battle, and they'd be so angry that he'd be able to find their weaknesses and kill them. And so he finds a Zen master and he hurls his insults for hours and hours and hours, and the Zen master does absolutely nothing, and he doesn't get riled by it at all. And eventually he gets the warrior gets so exhausted by hurling the insults that when it comes to the actual fight itself, the Zen master wins. And it's they say to him, how did you win the battle? And he says, well, if someone gives you a gift and you do not receive it, who does the gift belong? And I've used this with my son and with my kids, and I use it when I do talks. I think I mentioned to you before. It's like if someone calls you something on the football pitch when I'm coaching. They say you're rubbish, you're this, that, and the other. Or if I give you a present and I wrap it up and you choose not to accept it from me, Harry, who owns the gift? I do, because you haven't accepted it. And I say the same on a football pitch. They're giving you insults. It's only an insult if you choose to accept it. I don't accept it. Stay with you. And I think it's the same with beliefs and truths, and referencing it to the idea of connectivity. A lot of it's still that free will point, I think, as well. I was put it back in my mind. We're talking about parables. A lot of it is where we want the stuff we want to accept and the stuff that we don't. And the beauty about the alien question is it's open. There's no right, wrong, or indifferent. It's nice to have a belief in something. It's nice to be thinking that there might be something greater than ourselves if you're agnostic. It's nice also to have questions. But equally, if you're completely closed off to the idea, I think that's kind of okay. Until there's something crystal, that's kind of, for me, that's kind of okay too. I just think it's a fascinating question of, I think it asks more question of ourselves as humans and how our public consciousness, as opposed to the actual alien question, is how do we react? I like asking how people will respond, how we think that, in different nations, different cultures, people will look at the question differently. Will it make us serve each other better? As you mentioned, will it bring us together or will it divide us?
I think it's safe to say that people are going to respond in a way that is not what they potentially think they're going to respond, because I think people have in their mind how they would respond in certain situations, and then when push comes to shove, they respond very differently.
Yeah, well, that's like the Brexit vote. Don't go there. But it's a bit like you and I would get criticism for this show for even having the question from some that they may or may not exist. They'll go, "You're this, you're what an idiot, what a fool, and it's like." That's the gift of insults piece. Like, throw your insults, it's fine. Like, I don't need to receive them. I can believe what I want to believe, whether that's God, whether that's aliens, whether that's neither of the above.
It's egotistical of the human race to believe that in this, if indeed the universe is as we perceive it currently, and undoubtedly will be wrong in many aspects of it, but let's assume that this planet is not the only planet out there, right? Which I think is a reasonably safe bet. Then I think it's incredibly egotistical of the human race to then think that we're the only ones. Now, I think, a lot of people have said, there's the whole Fermi paradox or whatever it is, where the universe is so big that people. I actually don't buy into that. I think that there are certain signals sent by developing populations that are able to be read. Like, we have discovered some distant planet. This was maybe 6 months ago, where the energy signature of the planet indicated certain compounds being released in the atmosphere, which can only usually come, I think, almost exclusively from developed countries. Now, I need to look into that to see if that's being substantiated with other follow-up data. But, a civilization that has had 1 million years to evolve beyond what we can has probably got the technology to discover where their nearest neighbours might be based on various energy signatures. And also, I was watching something interesting the other day about the size of, we talk about the distances that we have to travel to traverse, and it would be impossible. Actually, just to get to the edge of the universe, the known universe, if you're traveling at 99.9999999% the speed of light, so you don't even break any physical realities, right? Because you can't supposedly accelerate beyond the speed of light, although there's nothing in the equations to say you can't travel faster than the speed of light. You just can't accelerate to it and beyond, but if you're already beyond. But that's another question. But the point is, when you accelerate really close to the speed of light, distance shrinks to the point that, for example, if we travel to the nearest star, which is about 4 light years away, so a light year being the distance that light travels in a single year, and we go there and come back, people on Earth will age 8 years, but the people on the spaceship will age much less, right? If you were to travel even closer to the speed of light and you were to go to the edge of the universe, it would take, in your ship time around, I think it was 32 years. So within a single generation, you could travel the entire universe, right? Of course, there are problems with accelerating to the speed of light, and the faster you accelerate, the more mass you have, and you get squashed to tiny pieces. But it's not breaking any physical laws. And actually, you could travel the universe in 30 years. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, it would be something like 30 billion years for a bystander, but for the person on the ship, it takes a lot less time, is my point. Yeah. So I don't believe the Fermi paradox is a valid reason why if they did exist, we couldn't have been visited.
I know. I like the Carl Sagan quote. You may have come across that in your research. That we are a way for the universe to know itself. And maybe that's enough for now. Maybe that's enough just for the moment.
Speaking of Carl Sagan, one of my favourite books, also made into a movie, although the book is better. I think I've talked about it before. Contact. Have you ever watched that movie?
I haven't. I'm not a big fan of science sci-fi alien movies. Or Alien and Alien, I absolutely loved as a kid.
Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey. The book is really good. It's one of my favourite books. I recommend if you want because he obviously was a scientist, but I think he wrote one book, and it's very strange that he wrote this book, I feel. I don't know. I think he was connected into something as well.
I'll give it a go. Well, that's probably a good way to finish. We've been rabbiting on for nearly an hour and 10 minutes about this. I do enjoy it. I find it interesting. And I've asked you lots of questions, and I just, people need to do their own research with these things. And depending on which site you get your research from, you probably get a slide, it's an echo chamber of, I think actually, depending on what you decide to put into Google, will probably give yourself your own indication of where you stand on the subject.
I would, as a listener, check out the documentaries, right? The S4 documentary, the Moment of Contact documentary, the, what's the other one? Disclosure documentary. No, Unacknowledged is a good documentary as well. If nothing else, if you fancy going to the movies this summer, Steven Spielberg coming out with his latest Alien movie, Disclosure Day. So maybe that is seeding things for us all. Who knows?
And everyone loved the X-Files, right? Come on.
It's
a 90s classic.
I did drop out after about season 5, but I
hear
they're doing a revival, so maybe I'll get back involved.
Good stuff. Well, look, Harry, always a pleasure, never a chore. A bit of a random episode on aliens, and I think it's relevant for Mindful Pass. I think we both probably agree. There's lots of questions around who we are, what this means for us, how we view the world. Are we open-minded, closed-minded? Why do we need to know? Why are we so fascinated by it? So I think it's been a good chat. And if you're interested in us covering any other random subjects, let us know on our Instagram channel. You can find us at mindful_pass_podcast on Insta as well. But Harry, good to chat with you, buddy.
Likewise. And have a good evening, my friend.